just came across Vue using something different for reactivity. They use proxies to keep track of what the state of the application is like and what needs to be updated in the UI. So you use what's called a reactive proxy, which will track whatever changes in the state, and after it changes, it will immediately invoke whatever methods necessary to update the UI. And that is amazing because you take a lot of the responsibility out of the UI into the proxy, so the proxy will take care of this for you. And it's a very niche concept of JavaScript. Not a lot of people know this. I know that I didn't, so I did a little bit of research about proxies. And if you want to do a little bit of research of your own, there's this amazing lesson on Vue Mastery by Greg Pollack and Evan Yu on reactive proxies. If you want to watch that, it's pretty nice, and it's a very cool starting point to try and figure out what proxies offer you in terms of reactivity. So going into the hello world example for Vue, if we open that up, right, on a code sandbox, we will see that we have a basic application. Now, inside of this Vue application, what we can do is we can actually access the data for the application, and we can mess around with it if we want. We can change it, or we can do whatever we want with it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into app.data.message, and I'm going to change that to hi. And now it will immediately, after I save this, it will go from hello Vue, it will render this, and then it will change it. If we were to, for instance, set timeout, right? So we want this to perform an async operation. So we want this to update, I don't know, after maybe 3 seconds, right? Because the data is reactive, it seems as if you're mutating the state of the application, right? It's like you're sort of mutating the data, but you're not using a hook like in the case of React, or you're not using a special method to do something like, I want to set the state to something else, or I want to get the state and then set the the new state based on what the previous state was. You're just mutating that. And it was, to me at first, it didn't make sense. Like how do you actually mutate an object inside of JavaScript and then the UI knows that it needs to re-render? So that's the magic of proxies, and that's something that I've been digging and into, and I wanted to share with you my findings. So I have a very basic application. It uses PowerShell to build and generate and make use of EX6 syntax, right? It's a pretty basic setup. I just build it with PowerShell. I just watch my HTML, so we can use EX6 syntax and JavaScript modules and whatnot, right? So if we look at this, we have document.getElementById, and we're getting this node, and we're setting the inner HTML. We're setting a content of hello world, right? So if we go into the HTML, we will see that we originally have this. We will find whatever this node is, and we will replace this by a hello world, which is happening in here. If we were to create something like a data object, right? And we were to create a message in here and have hello world, right? In here, we can replace this with data.message, and it will still work. But if I were to do something like set timeout, right? And here we have the callback. We'll perform a callback when 3 seconds have passed, and we want to do data.message and set that to hi, right? This is not going to work, obviously. This is not going to work. So 3 seconds will pass and it will not update. However, if we check what's happening, right? If I were to do window.data, it's equal to data, right? And we would check into the console, we see that there's a discrepancy here, right? Because data.message is hi, and what I'm seeing on the screen, it's hello world. This is because we have the state and the UI. Sorry, we have the state and the UI, and these are separated. They're not in sync with each other. And this is when reactivity comes in. And there are very different ways to achieve reactivity. One of them being having functions and invoking those functions, right? Another way of achieving reactivity is through the use of observers, and the one that Vue uses is combining both observers and proxies, right? So if we were to have a function here, let's say function render, and we can have an initial invocation. We have an initial render, right? So we're gonna call this as soon as our application starts, because we want to render this once. When we do whatever we want, right? When we mess with our data, we want to call this again, because we're doing what's called an imperative, right? We're calling imperatively the method, and we're triggering the UI to re-render. This is what's known as imperative programming, right? So you're telling the application that as soon as this happens, I need you to do something else, right? And this is not what we want. We want something that, what we want to achieve is that we want to subscribe to something, right? We want to listen to something, and when it changes, we want the application to handle that for us. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna create a new file called app.js, and in here we're gonna export the file class app, and we're gonna look at a couple of concepts in here, right? And I'm gonna sort of mix together observables and proxies in here, and this is tight coupling. This is not as you would implement this. Normally you will have your observers and observables separated from one another, but for the sake of example, I think this will do just fine. So we have a constructor in here, and we will get data, right? We will get a data object in here, and we want to store that, right? So we can say this.data is equal to the data that we're getting, and what we're gonna have now is we're gonna have callbacks, right? And this is gonna be an array. It's going to be an array of functions. Now, the whole pattern of an observer, and the point of an observer and an observable, it's an observable, it's something that will change over time, and an observer is something that watches that observable, and whenever the observable changes, it notifies the observer that it has changed, so that the observer can perform any kind of operation it needs to perform. So what we're gonna do actually is we're gonna provide the ability to subscribe, right? And we're gonna receive a function. We want to store that inside our callback array. So we're gonna do this, the callback.push. We're gonna push that function. What this will allow us to do is that we can let the application know that whenever something happens with the state, we want this function to run, right? And this could be multiple functions, right? We could be subscribed to, I don't know, as many functions as your application needs. And what this will do for you is that you will no longer need to imperatively tell the application to update the view, because it will do it for you, right? So we have our subscribe function. What we will do now is we will create a notify function, right? And this will go through all of our callbacks, and for each one of our callbacks, it will invoke it, right? So we will invoke all of the callbacks. We will go for all of the callbacks in the array, and for each one of the functions, we will invoke it. Now we want to create a get state, and this is something that we will change later on when we implement proxies. Create a get state, and we will return this dot state. Actually, I want to return, this is called this data. We will call this get data and set data, right? We will receive a new data. What we're gonna do I want to return this? Nah, it's okay. So we're just gonna set the data. This data, it's equal to new data, because that's what we have the get data for, right? So this is gonna return it, and this is just gonna set it. And this is fine. This actually will allow you to have an application that's reactive, right? So you've basically implemented, this is a very bare bones implementation of observables. So what we can do now is const my app, it's equal to, I will get my data object from here, and I will import app from app, and I want to create a new app, right? And what app needs is an object, right? What application needs, what this class needs on the constructor is a data object, the one that we're gonna keep track of. So we're gonna create it inside of the constructor, and we're gonna give it a new message with hello world. All right, so this is the message. So this is the data for our application. Now we have a render function, but instead of getting data.message, we want to get my app.data.message, right? Or what we can do, what will be even better, is we could do const message is equal to my app get data, right? We can invoke that message. Okay, and another thing that we have implemented in here is that we will no longer need to call the render function, because we can call myapp.setData, right? And we can set the new data. We can set message will be equal to hi. In here, we can take this away. And finally, what we need to do is we need to subscribe to the function that we want to call whenever the state changes. So we want to subscribe to render. Now this is not going to work, and it's not going to work because of something that we need to implement yet inside of here. So if we go back into our application, 3 seconds pass, and it's not going to update yet, because whenever we change the state, whenever we set the new data, what we want to do is we want to call the notify function, because there's new data, and we want to invoke all of the callbacks that have been registered in the application for whenever there's new data into the application. They want to update the UI themselves. So here I've got new data. You can go ahead and run again whatever function you need to run. So if we go back into our application, it says hi, so I'm gonna rerun it. 3 seconds pass, and then it says hi again. This is one way of achieving reactivity through the use of observables, right? So data is technically an observable. It's something that will change over time, and you can subscribe through callbacks, and whenever this changes, you will get notified and you can act accordingly. But what we can do is we can have something in here. We can have a method like init proxy, right? And we will get data in here. And what we want to return is a new proxy. Now the proxy object, it's something that's very niche into the JavaScript community, so it's not kind of easy to explain. But a proxy, it's basically an object that's not the original object that you send into the constructor. It's sort of a virtual copy, if you will, and it allows you to register handlers to that object. So whenever you try to interact with that new object, which is the proxy, a handler will be triggered. So imagine that you want to set a new value. So if you want to set a new value for that object, the set handler will be triggered. Or if you want to get a new value, get a value from that object, from that new proxy object, the get handler will get triggered. So it's basically like a protected object, right? So you're creating, by creating a new proxy, you take in a first object and then you return a new object with new capabilities that might be protected, or that you want to implement, you want to sort of extend beyond the possibilities of that first object that you send in to the proxy, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to send the data as our first parameter, which is the object, and we're gonna create an object as the second parameter, which are our handlers. Now, inside of our handlers, what we can do is we can create a couple of them. The most common of them are the set and the get, right? So in here, what we have, as it says in the autocomplete, we have the target, right? Which is whatever is coming in. We have the property that we're trying to access, and we have the value that we're trying to access in here, right? So this is gonna be a new function, and what we need to define here, we will do that later, and we will create a new get trap or handler for our proxy. This is gonna be another arrow function, and what we get here, we get our target as well, and we get the prop, right? So for the get, we don't want to do anything special for the get. We just want to give you, actually, we just want to give the end user the ability to get whatever it wants to get from the state. So we're going to go ahead and return the target, which is the object that we're trying to access, into the property that we're trying to access. Now for the set handler, we need to return whether or not the user or the developer or whomever is interacting with the code is going to be able to perform a modification into the object. So you need to, depending on whatever logic is inside of here, you will want to return a boolean of true or false, of either you're able to perform that modification or you're not able to. So we're gonna return true for just this demonstration. What we want to do here is inside of the target, inside of the prop that we're trying to access, we want to actually set the new value that we're being given, right? So inside of target, which is the object, inside of the property that we're trying to access, if we're given a new value, so if we have, right in here, we're accessing data in message, and value will be a new value for the message. So it would be hi or by world or whatever. We want to set it straight away. Now, what we can do here, and here's the fun part, and here's why proxies are so amazing, is that you're performing a modification of the object, but you can also have side effects. And one side effect that we can run here is the notify function. So before we actually change whatever is in the object for our application, right? After we change whatever is in the data object, we want to run notify, and notify will run all of the callbacks for us. So these two methods I can use, but I don't really have to, because I can interact directly with the data object, and after I interact with the data object, it will run the notify and trigger all of the callbacks that it needs to run so that the UI is updated. All right, so we have our render function, and instead of get data, we can get just our plain data, and we can destructure here to get the message. We subscribe, right, to our render function, and what we can do now is data, and I can take this away, and I can say I want the data on message to be high, or say I'm using a reactive proxy. Right, so 3 seconds is gonna pass, and after those 3 seconds pass, what we're gonna do is we're gonna call the data object, which is now a reactive proxy, and whenever we try to set a new property, it will go in here into our set handler, and it will notify all of the dependencies that we have registered as callbacks, and it will run them, right? So this way you won't need to use get data, set data, and notify from there, but you will be able to use the data object directly from the application you get. So if we go into our example and we run this, we have hello world, right? And after 3 seconds passes, hopefully it will re-render. All right, we forgot to actually call init proxy here, right? Because we need to, and we are returning the new proxy, right? So we call init proxy and we set in the data, and it will return the new proxy in here that we need. So let's see what's happening. Init proxy is not defined, right? Sorry, this dot init proxy, because it's within the scope of the class. So we have hello world, and after 3 seconds it changes, it runs the set handler, and it calls the notify, right? So it notifies all of the dependencies that we have in here that we have subscribed to, and after that our UI is updated for us. So with this, what we can do is we can actually go crazy and have like an input, and on the callback that we have for the input, we could directly set the data coming from the input, right? Because it's reactive, it will handle that for us. And yeah, that's pretty much what I have for you today on reactivity and proxies. And this is just like the tip of the iceberg as far as reactivity goes in Vue. I'm still messing around with it, trying to understand what proxies are and how reactivity works inside of Vue. I've written a post about this on my blog if you want to check that out. I'm gonna link that into the description. And yeah, happy coding.